It started with a letter, not a warning, not a complaint, a threat. Daniel Carter stood in his doorway, staring at the paper in his hands, reading the same line over and over again. Your home is now at risk of foreclosure. Over a few $100s in HOA fines. Fines he didn't even understand. Rules no one else seemed to follow. Punishments that only seemed to apply to him. At first, he tried to fix it. He followed every rule, attended every meeting, asked every question. And somehow, it only got worse. The HOA president made sure of that. But what they didn't know was that Daniel had stopped fighting the way they expected. Because while they were busy trying to take his house, he was quietly setting something up, something that would flip everything. And by the time they realized it, it was already too late. Because the man they tried to push out of his home ended up owning something they never thought he could touch. The neighborhood looked like the kind of place people dreamed about. Tree-lined streets, clean sidewalks, identical mailboxes, lawns trimmed so evenly they almost didn't look real. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt controlled. Daniel Carter noticed that the day he moved in, not peaceful, controlled. Still, he didn't question it much back then. He had come here to start over. After years of instability, long work hours, and personal setbacks, this house wasn't just a purchase. It was a reset. A place where things could finally be simple again. And for a while, they were. Mornings were calm. Evenings were quiet. Neighbors waved politely, though rarely stopped to talk. It felt distant but not hostile. That changed the first time he received a letter. It was neatly printed, formal, almost cold in tone. A notice from the HOA. A reminder about lawn maintenance standards. Daniel read it twice. His lawn looked fine. Maybe slightly uneven in one corner. Nothing unusual. He shrugged it off and trimmed it anyway. Problem solved. Or so he thought. A week later, another letter arrived. This time about the color of his mailbox. Daniel paused longer. Now it felt unnecessary. Still, he complied. It wasn't worth conflict. But the letters didn't stop. They became more frequent, more specific, more personal. A warning about the placement of his trash bin. A fine for leaving his porch light on overnight. A notice regarding inconsistent exterior appearance. Daniel began noticing something strange. When he walked the neighborhood, he saw similar violations everywhere. Untrimmed hedges, different mailbox styles, cars parked slightly off-center. But no one else seemed concerned. No one else was receiving letters. That's when he first noticed Evelyn Shaw. She moved through the neighborhood with quiet authority, always composed, always observing. People greeted her differently, with a kind of careful respect. Not warmth, respect, or maybe caution. She was the HOA president. Their first interaction was brief, polite on the surface, but something underneath felt deliberate. She commented on community standards, mentioned how important it was for everyone to contribute to the neighborhood image. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. Daniel left that conversation unsettled, though he couldn't explain why. Weeks passed. The fines started appearing, small at first, then stacking. Each one justified with technical wording, each one harder to dispute. Daniel began keeping every letter, every receipt, every notice, not out of fear, but because something didn't feel right. The neighbors noticed too, but they didn't speak openly. One man, while checking his mailbox, quietly muttered, "Best to just keep your head down." Another neighbor avoided eye contact entirely, and one woman, after briefly chatting with Daniel, abruptly ended the conversation when she saw Evelyn walking nearby. That's when it hit him. This wasn't normal. This wasn't about rules. Something else was happening. The emotional weight started building slowly. Daniel found himself checking his mail with hesitation, reviewing his own property, like he was searching for mistakes, second-guessing things he had never questioned before. His home, the place that once felt safe, now felt monitored. Then came the letter that changed everything. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a reminder. It was formal, final. Due to accumulated fines and unresolved violations, the property is now at risk of foreclosure. Daniel read it 3 times. each time slower than the last. The room felt quieter than usual. Not peaceful. Heavy. For the first time since moving in, Daniel didn't feel like a homeowner. He felt like a target. Daniel didn't panic. Not immediately. He approached it logically. There had to be a mistake. Something procedural. Something that could be resolved with a conversation. He attended his first HOA meeting. The room was orderly, structured, almost rehearsed. Evelyn sat at the front, composed as always. When Daniel spoke, the room shifted slightly. Not openly hostile, but uncomfortable. He presented his concerns calmly. The frequency of fines, the inconsistency in enforcement, the lack of clear explanation. Evelyn listened, nodded, then responded with precision. Every concern was redirected. Every question was answered without actually being answered. Rules were cited, policies referenced, procedures emphasized, and just like that, his concerns were dismissed. Officially. After the meeting, no one approached him. No one offered support. They avoided him, like being seen with him might cause problems. The fines continued, but now they escalated faster. Late fees appeared almost immediately. New violations were added before old ones could even be resolved. Daniel spent nights reviewing documents, comparing dates, tracking inconsistencies. And the more he looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't random. This wasn't oversight. This was targeted. Emotionally, the pressure built in layers. First confusion, then frustration, then isolation. He tried again. Another meeting, another attempt, this time firmer, more direct, but the outcome was the same. Only now the tone had changed. Subtly. Evelyn's responses were sharper, shorter, less patient. And then came the shift. A quiet one, but unmistakable. A neighbor who had once spoken kindly to Daniel suddenly stopped acknowledging him. Another moved their car away when he approached. Conversations ended when he got too close. The message was clear, without anyone saying it. Stay quiet, or stand alone. Then one evening, a neighbor finally spoke. Briefly, nervously, looking over their shoulder the entire time. They confirmed what Daniel suspected. Others had received warnings before, minor ones, but nothing like this. And no one challenged it, because those who did faced consequences. That was the moment everything clicked. This wasn't just about rules. It was about control. And Daniel had unknowingly stepped outside of it. The final notice arrived days later. More formal than the last. More serious. Foreclosure proceedings had officially begun. Daniel realized something important. Fighting this the usual way was exactly what they expected him to do. Daniel stopped reacting. That was the first change. No more arguing. No more emotional responses. No more visible frustration. From the outside, it looked like he had given up. But in reality, he had shifted focus. Instead of defending himself, he started observing everything. He studied the HOA bylaws in detail, line by line, clause by clause. Not just what they said, but how they were written. He looked for patterns, for gaps, for leverage. Then he expanded outward. Public records, financial filings, property data. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. But slowly, a different picture began to form. The HOA wasn't as strong as it appeared. Behind the structured meetings and formal notices, there were vulnerabilities, budget inconsistencies, unusual financial decisions, dependencies on specific approvals, and then something more personal, connections between the HOA leadership and certain financial obligations. Daniel didn't act on it immediately. He waited, gathered more information, confirmed details. Because this wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about precision. Emotionally, something shifted inside him. The stress didn't disappear, but it changed form. It became focus. The fear became clarity. And for the first time since the notices began, Daniel felt something different. Control. Then came the realization. Quiet, but powerful. There was a path forward. Not just to stop what was happening, but to turn it around completely. Daniel wasn't trying to survive anymore. He was preparing to take control. By the time the foreclosure process advanced, Daniel had already moved several steps ahead. Outwardly, nothing had changed. He still appeared quiet, still attended meetings without resistance, still accepted every notice without argument. To the HOA, he looked defeated. That was the advantage, because behind the scenes, everything was changing. Every decision Daniel made was calculated, careful, deliberate. He didn't rush, didn't overreach. He waited for the right moment, and when it came, he acted. The move itself was subtle, almost invisible from the outside, but its impact was immediate. The balance of power shifted. At first, no one noticed, except one person, Evelyn. Small things began to change for her. Unexpected notices, unfamiliar pressure, financial complications that hadn't existed before. At first, she dismissed them. Then she reviewed them more closely. And that's when she realized something was wrong, very wrong, because the structure she had relied on was no longer entirely in her control. And then came the moment, the realization, the connection, the truth. The person she had targeted now held leverage over her, not emotionally, financially, structurally, completely. For the first time, Evelyn wasn't in control of the situation. The final confrontation wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, because the power had already shifted. Evelyn approached Daniel, not publicly, not formally, privately. Her tone was different, measured, careful. She attempted to negotiate, framed it as resolution, as compromise. But Daniel saw through it. This wasn't about fairness. It was about regaining control. And this time, he didn't let it happen. He remained calm, composed, precise. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't react emotionally. He simply stated terms. Fair enforcement of rules. Transparency. Accountability. Not revenge. Correction. And slowly, the structure began to change. Neighbors started speaking again. Quiet support turned into open acknowledgement. The fear that once controlled the neighborhood started fading. Evelyn's influence diminished. Not suddenly, but steadily. And Daniel? He returned to the same place he had started, his home. But this time, it felt different. Not because it had changed, but because he had. In a place once defined by control, balance returned quietly, not through force, but through patience, clarity, and timing.